You are not tired because you do too much. You are tired because you never stop pressuring yourself. Even when you're not moving, the pressure is still running. Start. Do it. Fix it. Improve it. Don't waste time. And the harder you push, the more stuck you feel. You want to begin something, and you can't. It feels like too much, too many tasks, too many expectations, too many unfinished things. So you pressure yourself harder, and nothing happens. You stay tense, you stay alert, you stay tired. It becomes a loop. Pressure, tension, no movement, more pressure. And then the voice inside uses that as evidence. See? You're behind. You're not disciplined enough. You should be stronger, so it pushes again, and again, and again. But what if the pressure is not helping you move? What if it's the reason you can't start? What if the voice that sounds responsible is actually keeping your nervous system locked? And that's why you feel exhausted before you even begin? Let's talk about that voice. The one that sounds like discipline but feels like pressure. The one that tells you to start, but makes starting harder. It doesn't scream. It doesn't insult you. It sounds reasonable, responsible, mature. It says you could be doing more. It says you shouldn't relax yet. It says this isn't enough. And because it sounds logical, you believe it. You think this is motivation. You think this is what productive people feel. But real motivation creates movement. This voice creates tension. And tension is not the same as action. When you live under constant internal pressure, your nervous system stays slightly braced. Not in panic. Just in readiness. And readiness without release turns into fatigue. That's why you can sit for hours feeling busy in your head and still accomplish almost nothing. The energy is being used to maintain pressure, not to produce movement. The body tightens, the jaw locks, the shoulders rise, breathing becomes shallow, and when the body is tight, starting becomes harder. So you interpret that as laziness, and the voice pushes harder. But the more it pushes, the more your system resists. Because pressure activates stress, and stress is designed for short bursts, not for constant living. When pressure never turns off, your system conserves energy. It freezes. And you call that procrastination. But it's not procrastination. It's a nervous system that never feels safe enough to move freely. And as long as the voice keeps pushing, the tension stays. And as long as the tension stays, real energy cannot return. This voice did not appear randomly. It did not wake up one day and decide to torture you. It was built, slowly, repeatedly, usually in environments where being alert, being responsible, being better than average was safer than relaxing. Maybe you were praised for achievement. Maybe mistakes were noticed more than effort. Maybe good was normal, but excellent was expected. Maybe nobody directly pressured you, but you learned that being ahead felt safer than being behind. So your system adapted. It created an internal supervisor, a voice that monitors, evaluates, pushes, corrects. At first, it helped. It kept you sharp. It kept you focused. It helped you achieve. And because it produced results, your brain linked pressure with success. The problem is not that the voice exists. The problem is that it never updated. You are no longer in the environment where constant internal surveillance is required. But the voice never learned to step back. It still operates as if danger exists in slowing down. And danger doesn't have to mean trauma. It can simply mean loss of approval, loss of control, loss of identity. When you grow up associating worth with output, rest feels risky. Not dramatic. Not catastrophic. Just slightly unsafe. Because if you stop pushing, who are you? If you are not improving, what is your value? So the voice keeps tension alive to maintain identity. It confuses stillness with decline. It confuses softness with weakness. It confuses enough with mediocrity. And your nervous system pays the price. Chronic internal pressure creates a low-grade stress response, not enough to break you, but enough to keep you tired, enough to keep your muscles slightly contracted, enough to prevent full recovery. That is why you can sleep and still feel unrested. That is why you can have a free evening and still feel behind. The pressure is not task-based. It is identity-based. You are not trying to finish a to-do list. You are trying to prove you are adequate. And proving never ends, because the voice keeps moving the standard. You reach one level, it raises it. You finish one task, it highlights the next. You achieve something, it compares you to someone further ahead. There is no finish line, because the finish line is not the point. The point is vigilance. The voice believes that staying tense prevents failure. But tension does not prevent failure. It only prevents ease. And here is the hidden cost. When the body lives in tension long enough, it begins to associate effort with threat. So starting becomes heavier. Initiating becomes harder. Not because you lack ambition, but because your system is already overactivated. And overactivation leads to avoidance. So you push, you freeze, you push harder, you freeze more. And the voice interprets the freeze as proof that you need even more pressure. That is how the loop sustains itself. Internal pressure creates tension. Tension reduces movement. Reduced movement triggers more internal criticism. And criticism increases pressure again. It feels like a productivity issue. But it is a regulation issue. You are not lacking force. You are lacking permission to soften. And until the voice changes tone, the tension will remain. Not because you are weak, but because your system is trying to survive a threat that no longer exists. You feel it in your body before you understand it in your mind. The tight jaw, the raised shoulders, the shallow breath, the constant slight forward lean, as if you are preparing to move but never fully moving. Your body is braced, and a braced body does not create freely. It reacts. Internal pressure does not only live in thoughts, it lives in muscle tone. When the voice inside says, "Do more," your nervous system interprets it as demand. Demand activates stress physiology. Stress physiology prepares you for action. But here is the paradox. Chronic preparation without release drains energy. When the body is constantly preparing, it never fully resets. That's why you can feel tired before doing anything physical, because tension consumes energy even in stillness. You think you're resting while scrolling, but your nervous system is not resting. It is still slightly contracted, slightly alert, slightly on standby. This is why starting feels heavy. When a system is already under tension, adding a new task feels like adding weight to an already clenched muscle. It is not that you don't want to act. It is that your system is already overloaded with background activation. Real movement requires a certain softness, a flexibility in the body and mind. Chronic internal pressure removes that softness. It replaces it with rigidity. And rigidity is inefficient. It uses more energy for less output. That is why you can spend hours thinking about starting something and feel completely drained without actually beginning. The energy is being burned maintaining internal friction. You are fighting yourself before you even act. And fighting yourself is expensive. Over time, the body adapts to this constant state of low-grade stress. Cortisol levels remain slightly elevated. Muscles remain slightly tight. Recovery becomes partial instead of complete. Sleep does not fully restore you. Even positive events do not fully relax you. Because the internal voice does not allow full release. It whispers that something else should be done. Something else should be improved. Something else should be prepared. So the body never drops. And when the body never drops, energy never truly refills. This is why you feel like you are living in effort, even when you are not actively working. The effort is internal, invisible, continuous. And because it is invisible, you blame yourself instead of the mechanism. You say you lack discipline. You say you are procrastinating. You say you need to push harder. But pushing harder only tightens the system further. What you call laziness is often a body that has learned to resist pressure. What you call lack of motivation is often a nervous system that is protecting itself from more strain. If tension is constant, the system will eventually choose stillness as protection. Not because you are weak, but because the body cannot stay mobilized indefinitely. So it reduces output, it slows you down. And then the voice interprets that slowdown as failure. And the cycle continues. The voice increases pressure, the body increases resistance, and you stand in the middle of that loop, wondering why you cannot simply start. At some point, the voice stopped sounding separate. It stopped feeling like pressure and started feeling like personality. You don't hear it as an internal supervisor anymore. You hear it as yourself. I'm just like this. I've always been demanding. I function better under pressure. The voice merges with identity. And once that happens, questioning it feels dangerous. Because if the voice is not you, then who are you without it? This is where the tension becomes structural, not situational, structural. The voice becomes your inner manager, your evaluator, your motivator, your critic, your regulator. And because it helped you achieve things in the past, you respect it, you trust it, you defend it, even when it exhausts you, especially when it exhausts you. You tell yourself that this is what keeps you strong, that without this internal push, you would fall apart, that if you softened, you would become lazy. But here is the deeper truth. When pressure becomes identity, rest feels like a threat to self-concept. If you are the disciplined one, the responsible one, the one who holds everything together, then what happens when you stop holding? The voice is not only pushing tasks, it is protecting identity. And identity feels more important than comfort. So the system stays tense to preserve the image of competence. This is why even success does not quiet the voice. Because the goal is not achievement. The goal is vigilance. The voice is not satisfied because satisfaction would mean lowering guard. And lowering guard feels unsafe. Somewhere in your history, tension equaled control. And control equaled safety. So the voice learned that relaxing equals risk. Not logical risk. Emotional risk. The risk of being insufficient. The risk of being seen as average. The risk of not meeting an invisible standard. And that invisible standard moves. It evolves. It adapts. But it never disappears. Over time, you forget what it feels like to act without internal commentary, to complete something and simply stop, to rest without negotiation, to exist without evaluation. Everything is filtered through performance, even your private life, even your thoughts, even your body. You measure how well you are managing yourself. And because the measurement never fully stops, tension never fully stops, the voice becomes the background narrator of your life. And narrators do not sleep. They observe. They comment. They correct. And living under constant narration is exhausting. But the most difficult part is this. If someone tried to take that voice away, you might resist. Because despite everything, it feels like your strength. It feels like the reason you are competent, capable, responsible. You fear that without it, you would drift, that you would lose discipline, that you would lose your edge. But what if the voice is not your strength? What if your strength existed before the pressure? What if your competence does not require tension? And what if the exhaustion you feel is not proof that you need to push harder, but proof that something inside you has been working overtime for too long? So what happens if the voice softens? What happens if, even for a moment, it stops pushing? This is where fear appears. Not dramatic fear, not panic, just a subtle, uncomfortable question. If I stop pressuring myself, will I fall apart? Will I become lazy? Will I lose momentum? Will I waste time? The voice has convinced you that tension is the engine, that without internal pressure, nothing moves. And because you have evidence from your past, times when you pushed and achieved, you believe it. You believe that pressure equals productivity. But look closely. Did pressure create movement? Or did it create urgency? Urgency can produce bursts, but bursts are not sustainable. They are expensive. They cost energy. They cost recovery. They cost peace. The voice does not produce calm, consistent action. It produces spikes, and spikes are followed by crashes. That's why you oscillate. High push, then fatigue, then guilt, then push again. If the voice softens, something else has to take its place. And that is what feels unfamiliar. Because you have never practiced acting from steadiness. You have practiced acting from tension. Tension feels like readiness. Steadiness feels like vulnerability. Because in steadiness, there is no whip, no constant reminder, no internal alarm, and without the alarm, you fear you will not move. But here is what the voice never tells you. Real energy does not come from alarm. It comes from regulation. When the nervous system is not braced, it has access to flexible focus. When the body is not clenched, movement requires less effort. When the mind is not under constant evaluation, starting becomes lighter. The voice believes it is protecting you from stagnation, but often, it is the reason you feel stuck. Because pressure narrows perception. It makes everything feel urgent and overwhelming at the same time. And when everything feels urgent, nothing feels manageable. Softening the voice does not mean removing standards. It does not mean lowering ambition. It means separating movement from threat. It means learning that action does not require fear. And this is the part your system does not yet trust. You have associated growth with tension for so long that calm feels suspicious. But calm is not collapse. Calm is capacity. When the voice softens, your first reaction might be discomfort. You might feel unstructured, untethered, less sharp. That is withdrawal from constant pressure, not proof that you are deteriorating. The internal voice that keeps you tense will argue that softening is weakness. But what if tension has been masking your real strength? What if you are capable not because of pressure, but in spite of it? And what if the exhaustion you carry is not the price of ambition, but the cost of never being allowed to stop bracing? The cycle does not break by fighting the voice. It breaks by noticing it, not arguing, not silencing, not replacing it with affirmations. Just noticing. The voice survives because it feels automatic. It blends into your thinking so seamlessly that you don't recognize it as a pattern. It sounds like logic. It sounds like planning. It sounds like responsibility. But there is a difference between planning and pressure. Planning creates clarity. Pressure creates contraction. The first crack in the cycle appears the moment you catch the tone. Not the words. The tone, the sharpness, the urgency that has no real deadline. The slight tightening in your chest when you think about starting. The subtle, internal "come on" that carries tension instead of encouragement. That is the voice. And the moment you recognize it as a mechanism rather than truth, something shifts. Not dramatically, but enough. You begin to see that the pressure is not necessary for movement. It is just familiar. Familiar does not mean required. For years, the voice has trained you to associate tension with action. So when you try to act without tension, it feels unnatural. But unnatural does not mean wrong. It means new. The voice will protest. It will say you are lowering your standards, that you are becoming soft, that you are losing your edge. But look carefully. When has the pressure actually created consistent flow? Most of the time, it creates bursts followed by fatigue, or overthinking followed by avoidance. The breaking point is not when you push harder. It is when you pause before the push. When you feel the tightening, and instead of amplifying it, you allow a small exhale. That exhale is not laziness. It is regulation. Regulation restores access to flexible energy. Flexible energy moves differently than pressured energy. It does not spike and crash. It builds and sustains. But you cannot access it while the body is braced. So the first step is not do more calmly. It is notice when the pressure starts. Notice the instant your mind shifts from intention to internal demand. Notice when your shoulders rise. Notice when your breathing shortens. Notice when your thoughts accelerate. That awareness interrupts automation. An interruption creates choice. Choice is the beginning of freedom from the loop, not because the voice disappears, but because it is no longer invisible. And once something is visible, it is no longer running the entire system without consent. There is another way to move. It does not feel dramatic. It does not feel urgent. It does not come with adrenaline. It feels quieter, slower at first, almost suspicious, because you are used to tension as proof of seriousness, used to pressure as proof of commitment. When the internal voice softens, the silence can feel empty. But it is not empty. It is space. And space is what allows energy to circulate instead of contract. Movement without tension feels different. It begins smaller, cleaner, less loaded with meaning. You start something not to prove your worth, not to silence the voice, not to catch up, but simply because you decided to begin. There is no inner whip, no internal argument, no surge of self-criticism if it is imperfect. The body is not braced. The breath is not shortened. The shoulders are not preparing for battle. This kind of movement does not feel heroic. It feels ordinary. And that ordinariness is what makes it sustainable. Sustainable action does not require internal pressure. It requires regulation. When your nervous system is not under threat, starting costs less energy, continuing costs less energy, finishing costs less energy, and most importantly, stopping does not feel like failure. You can complete something and allow it to be enough for today, not because the standards dropped, but because the urgency dropped. The internal voice that keeps you tense may never fully disappear. It was built over years. It learned its role well, but it does not have to control the tone of your life. You can hear it without obeying it. You can notice the pressure without amplifying it. You can feel the tightening and choose not to escalate it. And slowly, the body begins to trust that movement does not require fear. That effort does not require contraction. That worth does not require constant vigilance. The most radical shift is not becoming more productive. It is becoming less tense. Because when tension decreases, energy returns. When energy returns, action becomes natural. And when action becomes natural, you no longer need the voice to push you forward. You move because you can, not because you are being internally chased. And that is a different life. Not louder, not more impressive, but steadier, lighter, and finally, less exhausting.